The sound of porcelain shattering pierced the quiet night, echoing off the small walls of the East Boston apartment. Then, silence. 7-year-old Sophie Ruiz froze at the doorway, her heart hammering so loud she thought the walls would hear. Her mother lay sprawled on the kitchen floor, motionless, one arm reaching toward a spilled cup of chamomile tea. Steam still curled from the broken mug, rising slowly like a ghost. Elena's head had hit the cabinet on the way down, and now a thin line of blood traced behind her ear. Sophie dropped her stuffed koala, its small stitched eyes staring up at her helplessly, and stepped forward on trembling legs. "Mum," she called softly, almost afraid to disturb the silence. No answer. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she remembered the words her mother had drilled into her. "If anything ever goes wrong, call Uncle Ryan." Climbing onto the counter, Sophie grabbed the phone, fingers trembling so violently she thought she might drop it. She opened the contacts list and misdialed one number off. A calm, low voice answered. Sophie froze. "A stranger. My mum. She's bleeding. She's not waking up. Please, help her." Small voice cracked, and just like that, her entire world hung by a thread. Asterisk, the night was quiet in East Boston. The kind of quiet that settles, heavy in your chest, and makes even the smallest noise echo. Then it came, a sharp crash, porcelain hitting the floor, shattering into 100 tiny pieces. Sophie Ruiz, only 7, froze in the doorway of the kitchen. Her small hands were curled into fists at her sides. Her eyes widened, staring at the scene before her. Her mother, Alina, lay motionless on the cold linoleum. One arm sprawled across the broken cup, steam still rising from the spilled chamomile tea. The faint smell of herbs mixed with something metallic, something wet. Blood traced a thin line from behind her ear. Sophie's stuffed koala slipped from her grip. It hit the floor with a soft thump. "Forgotten, Mum," she whispered, her voice shaking. Nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She remembered her mother's instructions for emergencies. Call Uncle Ryan. She climbed onto the counter, her legs trembling, fingers shaking. She grabbed the phone. Her small thumb swiped through contacts, stopping at Ryan. She pressed the number and misdialed. Just one wrong digit. A man's voice answered, calm, low. "Hello, hello." Sophie hesitated, then blurted out, "I'm sorry, is this Ryan?" "No, I need help. My mum fell. She's bleeding. She's not waking up. Please come." Static. Crackled, then a voice. Damien Ward, barefoot on the polished concrete of his penthouse. City lights glittering behind him. "Where are you?" "I don't know the street, but we live above Jimmy's Tools. There's a red door. Apartment 3B. He didn't ask more. He didn't wait for anyone. He grabbed his coat and keys. 13 minutes later, a black SUV tore down a frozen street, screeching to a stop outside the neglected historic building. A red door hung on its hinges. Damien took the steps to at a time. The hallway smelled of dust and old radiator steam. Apartment 3B's door opened just an inch. A small girl, socks soaked, held her mother's phone like a shield. "You came," she said. "I did," Damien replied, and stepped inside. The apartment was neat but worn. Laundry piled in the corner, soup still warm on the stove. A calendar, with 3 red circles on the fridge. Elena's breathing was shallow, her face pale. Damien checked her pulse. Concussion, maybe more. She needed help now. He lifted her carefully. Coat, he said to Sophie. She grabbed it and followed. The SUV roared to life. Damien drove with one hand, calculating the nearest emergency entrance with the shortest wait time. At the second red light, Sophie asked softly, "You're not Ryan, are you a doctor?" "No," he said. She thought for a moment, then whispered, "You came anyway." He didn't answer. But in that silence, a quiet promise hung between them. She's going to be okay. Asterisk, the SUV's engine growled through the quiet. Frozen streets, its tires crunching against the thin layer of ice. Inside, Sophie sat stiffly beside her mother. Her small hands gripped the edge of her coat. Every flicker of streetlight, every turn of the wheel, seemed magnified in her heightened awareness. Her eyes never left Damien. She watched his hands on the wheel, the set of his jaw, the calm intensity in his eyes. Every second stretched out, every breath heavy with unspoken fear. "You're not Ryan," she whispered, voice barely audible. "No," Damien replied, steady, calm. "But I'm here now. Are you a doctor?" "No," he said, not looking at her. His focus never wavered from the road ahead. She considered that for a moment. Then, softly, almost to herself, she said, "You came anyway." Damien glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Her eyes were wide, trembling but not with fear. There was hope there, fragile but unwavering. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She already understood. The city blurred past. Traffic signals changed. Street lamps flickered, and the cold night air seemed to press in from every corner. Damien calculated every second, every turn, every light already mapping the fastest route to the hospital in his mind. Finally, the glowing sign of the ER appeared. Damien didn't slow. He lifted Alina gently from the seat, her body light, almost weightless in his arms. Sophie followed silently, her small coat dragging behind her, clutching her mother's hand. "I'm not leaving her in the hallway," he said firmly. No one argued. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't need to. Every second counted, inside. The fluorescent lights were harsh, almost blinding. But Damien moved with quiet authority, bypassing the chaos of the night shift. Nurses glanced up, startled by his decisiveness. He placed Alina on the trauma bed with care and stood back, allowing professionals to stabilize her. Sophie stayed close, small fingers gripping the edge of the bed. Damien handed her a warm bottle of water, which she held silently, unsure how to drink, unsure how to process the whirlwind of the last hour. Time slowed. Every heartbeat echoed. Every beep of the monitors sounded louder in the quiet room. Damien watched, silently, vigilant, while Sophie's eyes flicked between her mother and him, and for the first time that night, she let herself breathe. Sophie. Curled up on the hard waiting area bench, her small frame swallowed by the cushions. Her jacket was zipped all the way to her chin, and she hugged it tightly as if it could shield her from the fear still lingering in the hospital's bright, cold lights. Damien handed her a warm bottle of water. She held it silently, her fingers tracing the condensation. She didn't drink yet, not because she wasn't thirsty, but because she wasn't ready. She was still holding on to the moment, still trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. Time stretched, long and heavy. Then a nurse appeared, her face soft but professional. Alina was stable. Concussion, dehydration, exhaustion. No internal bleeding. The words sank in slowly. She would wake soon. Sophie exhaled a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Curiosity and caution warred in her chest. She peeked into the trauma bay. Her mother's eyes fluttered, open, delicate, and unsteady. Her body stiffened, a dull ache pulsing from her temple. A man sat in the corner, calm, silent, present. Not a doctor. Not anyone she recognized. Who are you? Elena whispered, her voice fragile, breaking slightly. I got a phone call from your daughter, he said quietly. She said you fell. I was the one who brought you here. Memory struck. Like lightning, the cold kitchen tiles, the spilled tea, the panic of being small and helpless. She had misdialed, yet somehow someone had come anyway. Thank you, she murmured, her voice trembling, for helping her, for helping me. The man didn't nod. He didn't smile, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a quiet acknowledgement. His shoulders relaxed slightly, as if the weight of responsibility had been carried and now released. Sophie watched silently, her small chest rising and falling, the tension in her fingers slowly melting. She understood, without a word, that this stranger had given them both something more valuable than any words could convey. Presence. Hours passed. The sterile smell of the hospital, the soft hum of machines, the intermittent footsteps of nurses, each sound etched into Sophie's mind. But alongside fear, there was safety, and alongside pain, there was care. Damien stayed in the corner, quiet, patient, a guardian, but without the title. Just a man who answered a wrong number and turned it into a lifeline. Sophie leaned against the wall, exhausted but alert. And as her mother's breathing evened, as the night slowly gave way to the early whispers of dawn, she realized they weren't alone anymore. The sun had barely started to rise, soft beams filtering through the hospital blinds. The waiting room was quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. Sophie sat close to her mother's bed, fingers intertwined with Elena's, afraid to let go. Damien stood nearby, leaning against the wall, observing without intruding. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His presence alone was a steady anchor in a world that had spun too fast for a little girl to comprehend. Sophie glanced at him. Why did you come? You didn't have to. He paused, then looked down at her, eyes calm but thoughtful. I know what it feels like to need help, and not have anyone show up. Sophie's eyebrows knitted together. But you don't even know us. No, he admitted softly. But sometimes, that doesn't matter. Sometimes all it takes is being there. Her mother stirred, eyelids fluttering open, groaning softly. Sophie squeezed her hand gently. Elena's gaze fell on Damien, confusion and gratitude mingling. You brought me here. She whispered, double quotes, yes, Damien said. His voice steady, quiet, almost a whisper itself. Your daughter needed someone. I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. A long silence stretched, not uncomfortable, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. Words were unnecessary. Presence spoke louder than any sentence. Sophie watched the exchange, a small smile tugging at her lips. She realized something profound. Sometimes the world's kindness comes from unexpected places. Sometimes strangers are angels in disguise, carrying strength when you can't find it yourself. Elena's hand twitched, then grasped Damien's briefly. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Damien nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement, then stepped back. He didn't linger. He had done what was needed. That was enough. Sophie leaned closer to her mother, whispering stories of school, of friends, of little adventures, asterisk filling the space with normalcy, with warmth. Damien watched quietly, a silent guardian witnessing the slow, fragile healing of trust and courage. The morning continued, and with it, the small, almost imperceptible moments that would shape Sophie's memory forever. Asterisk, the stranger who had answered a wrong number, who had crossed the line between unknown and protector, had left a mark that neither time nor distance could erase. Asterisk, hours had passed since Elena's arrival. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, but inside the room, a fragile sense of calm had settled. Sophie sat at her mother's bedside, brushing a stray lock of hair from Elena's forehead. Elena's eyes opened again, brighter this time. More aware, she blinked slowly, taking in the sterile hospital room, the monitors, the soft rhythm of beeping machines. Then her gaze fell on Sophie. "Mummy," Sophie whispered, squeezing her mother's hand gently. "Hi, pumpkin," Elena murmured, voice faint but warm. A small smile tugged at her lips. Sophie felt her chest fill with relief, so powerful it nearly knocked the breath out of her dot. Damien stood quietly in the corner, his presence steady, unwavering. Sophie looked at him, her eyes wide. "She's getting better," she said, almost as if speaking aloud would make it real. "Yes," Damien replied softly. "Slowly, but she's getting there." The little girl's fingers traced her mother's hand. Each movement, each flutter of a blink, each shallow breath was a victory. And Sophie cherished every tiny sign. A nurse came in, checking vital signs, adjusting the forward drip. She smiled at the small family scene. "Looks like she's stabilizing nicely. Soon, she'll be awake fully." Sophie exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. I thought I lost her." Damien's eyes softened. "You didn't, not ever. You did exactly what she needed." For the first time since the evening began, Sophie allowed herself to lean back in the chair. She watched her mother's slow, steady breaths. The tension that had held her so tightly for hours started to ease. Replaced by hope, Elena stirred again, this time more purposefully. "Sophie, thank you for calling," she whispered, "even if it wasn't the right number. You saved me." Sophie's lips trembled. She swallowed hard, nodding. "I just wanted someone to come." "And they did," Damien said, his voice calm, filled with a quiet strength. Outside the room, the morning light grew stronger, filling the hospital with warmth. Inside, the fragile family bond stretched, taut by fear, by panic, by the unknown, was slowly stitching itself back together. Sophie realized, with a soft, quiet wonder, that sometimes miracles didn't arrive with flashing lights or dramatic gestures. Sometimes they came quietly, with steady hands, with calm voices, with strangers who refused to turn away. And in that room, with the soft rhythm of her mother's breaths and the steady presence of someone she would never forget, Sophie felt the first true flicker of peace. Asterisk, the day wore on slowly, sunlight spilling into the hospital room in soft, golden streams. Sophie had moved to sit closer to her mother, brushing back a strand of hair, whispering small reassurances. Elena's eyes followed her daughter, warmth softening the lines of pain on her face. Each blink, each small movement, was a step back from the edge that had threatened to swallow them the night before. Damien remained a quiet presence. He didn't intrude, didn't speak unless necessary. But Sophie felt him, felt the stability he brought. It was strange and yet comforting. "Why are you still here?" Sophie asked softly, curiosity coloring her voice. Damien glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Because sometimes someone has to stay until things feel safe again, he said, voice gentle, almost a whisper. Sophie considered that, then nodded slowly. Mummy says it's important to stay until the storm passes. Alina gave a faint smile, her hand reaching for Sophie's. She's right, Pumpkin, she whispered. The room fell into a comfortable silence. Machines hummed, sunlight shifted, shadows stretched. Outside, the hospital corridors buzzed with life, but inside, time seemed to slow, each heartbeat and breath carrying weight, meaning, and connection. Sophie glanced at Damien, small curiosity in her eyes. Do you have a family? He hesitated, the question settling like dust in the quiet room. I used to, he said finally, voice soft, a touch of memory and loss woven through it. Now, I guess I consider anyone who needs help as family. Sophie blinked, processing. Then, in a quiet voice full of wonder, she whispered, You're like our hero. Damien's lips twitched into a brief, unassuming smile. Maybe, he said, shrugging lightly. Or maybe just someone who answers the phone when the world seems scary. Sophie giggled softly, the sound like a tiny bell in the stillness. Her mother smiled, the faintest curve, eyes glistening. And in that moment, the three of them, stranger, mother-daughter, shared a bond neither had expected, woven quietly from courage, fear, and an unspoken promise that someone would be there when it mattered most. As the sun dipped lower, painting the room in gentle amber light, Sophie felt a strange kind of peace. The world outside might still be unpredictable and frightening, but in this room, with these people, she had found a safe corner, a place where hearts could heal. Asterisk. The room was quiet now, filled only with the steady rhythm of heartbeats and soft, shallow breaths. Sophie sat beside her mother, holding her hand as if letting go might make everything collapse. Elena's eyes opened slowly, a glimmer of clarity shining through the fog of pain. She looked at Damien, then back at Sophie. I need to make a decision, she whispered, voice trembling but determined. Sophie's eyes widened. Decision? About what? Alina hesitated, gathering strength. About my treatment. About what comes next. I can't just drift along. I have to choose what I want for myself. For us. Damien stepped closer, keeping his voice gentle. Whatever you decide, you're not alone. You have Sophie, and you have people willing to stand by you. Sometimes, making the choice is the first step to taking back control. Sophie squeezed her mother's hand. I want you to be okay, Mummy, to stay with me. Alina smiled weakly, eyes glistening. I want that too, Pumpkin, more than anything. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air in the room was heavy, thick with anticipation, but also with hope. Then Alina took a slow, deliberate breath. I choose to fight, for me, for Sophie, for life. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, relief spilling over. Mummy, really? Yes, Alina said, her voice gaining strength with each word. We have a chance, and I want it. Damien nodded quietly, a silent affirmation, his eyes reflecting pride and respect. Then we fight together, step by step. The room seemed to exhale with them, as if the walls themselves acknowledged the shift. Fear had given way to determination. Despair had softened into hope. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Sophie felt a bond solidifying, not just between mother and daughter, but with the stranger who would become an unspoken guardian. Time passed, and with each passing hour, Alina grew stronger. Each smile, each blink, each whispered word was a step toward recovery. And for Sophie, watching her mother reclaim her life, was nothing short of a miracle. Outside the room, the world carried on with its noise and chaos. Inside, the three of them, connected by courage, by choices, by quiet heroism, discovered that even the smallest decisions can ripple outward, shaping destinies in ways no one could predict. The day after Elena's decision, the hospital room felt different, lighter, warmer, filled with quiet optimism. Sophie sat near the window, watching sunlight dance across the floor. Her tiny fingers traced patterns on the bedsheet, a nervous habit she'd never quite shaken. Alina rested, eyes closed, a soft, contented expression on her face. Each breath she took seemed steadier, stronger than before. And yet, it wasn't just the physical recovery that mattered. It was the ripple effect of courage, of choices, and of unseen acts of kindness. Sophie glanced at Damien, who stood quietly by the doorway. "Do you think people can really change someone's life just by being there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien smiled softly, kneeling to her level. "More than you know. Sometimes it's a word, a gesture, or just showing up. That's enough to create ripples." Sophie thought about the emergency call she had made, the wrong number, the panic in her tiny hands, the fear in her heart. And yet, somehow, all those small actions had led them here. "I guess I did help," she murmured, a faint pride in her voice. "Yes," Damien said, "you did, and you're still helping every day, just by staying, by caring, by loving." Alina stirred, opening her eyes slowly. She caught Damien's gaze and then looked at Sophie, a smile spreading across her face. "I feel stronger today, not just because of medicine, but because of you too. You reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there's light waiting to be found." Sophie felt tears welling up, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that reflected relief, hope, and gratitude. She leaned forward, resting her head gently on her mother's arm. Damien looked on quietly, aware that sometimes the simplest moments carry the most profound meaning. "Life," he said softly, almost to himself, "is a collection of ripples. And some of them, they carry people to safety, even when they think they're alone." Outside the window, sunlight filtered through the trees, moving with the rhythm of a gentle breeze. Inside, in that small hospital room, the ripples of a little girl's courage, a mother's determination, and a stranger's quiet support intertwined, creating waves of hope that would continue far beyond those walls. Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sunlight, the steady presence of those around her, and the knowledge that sometimes one small action, one brave, tiny choice could change everything. And in that room, in that moment, she realized every act of care, no matter how small, had the power to create a world of difference. The morning. Sun streamed through the hospital window, painting the room in gentle golden hues. Birds chirped faintly outside, carrying the promise of a new day. Sophie sat close to her mother, brushing a soft lock of hair from Elena's forehead. Elena opened, her eyes stronger than the day before. Her gaze swept the room, lingering on Sophie, then Damien, who stood quietly in the corner. A soft smile curved her lips, a smile that spoke of resilience, of hope, of beginnings. "I feel like I can breathe again," Alina whispered, her voice carrying a new sense of determination. Not just because I'm healing, but because I know I'm not alone. Sophie's eyes sparkled with tears of joy. "Mummy, you're really okay now?" Alina chuckled softly, the sound warm and full of relief. "Thanks to you, Pumpkin, and someone else who showed up when we needed him most." Her gaze found Damien's, and he simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. It was a moment suspended in time, three hearts connected by courage, compassion, and the extraordinary ripple of small, brave actions. Days passed, and Alina grew stronger with each one. She walked a few steps, then a few more, supported by Damien and Sophie's careful hands. The hospital room, once heavy with fear, now shimmered with laughter, whispers, and the quiet hum of healing. Sophie often sat by the window, watching the world outside, and thinking of how a single accidental, panicked call, had brought an entire chain of hope into their lives. She realized that sometimes life's greatest changes came from the smallest gestures. One afternoon, as sunlight danced across the floor, Alina took Sophie's hand. "We're starting fresh, my love. A new chapter, a new life." Sophie hugged her mother tightly, "And we'll face it together, always." Damien watched silently, a quiet smile on his face. He knew he would step back soon, letting the family reclaim their life. But he also knew that the bonds forged in crisis could never be broken. The world outside continued, fast and relentless. But inside that room, the air was filled with something timeless: hope, love, and the quiet magic of new beginnings. And Sophie understood, in her small, wise way, that every ending was just the start of something new. Every fear overcome, every hand held in kindness, every brave choice, it all led to this: a life renewed, a heart strengthened, and a future bright with promise. For Alina, Sophie, and even Damien, the journey was far from over. But now they faced it together, carrying the courage, love, and resilience that had carried them through the darkest hours, and sometimes that was all anyone needed to change everything. And just when they thought the storm was over, life had one more surprise waiting. Because sometimes the smallest call, the tiniest act of courage, can change not just one life, but the world around you. Will you recognize your chance to make a difference when it comes knocking?